Tactical Team.
Hello, this is Malorian. This is the Orc Tactical Team. And what we're going to be talking about today is now another suggestion from the Google Plus Warhammer YouTubers page. And this one comes from Ryan Winters saying, "Hey Malorian, could you talk about different terrain, magical terrain, and how you actually play it differently? I talked in the past about how the different scenarios will change the way you play and all this. So how does the actual magical terrain change it?" And this can be a very diverse topic. Of course, there is so much different terrain out there, and we can get into, building tactics and all that stuff. But I'm going to go try and really focus in on some of the more magical stuff that can really change the game. Because really, some of it isn't all that big of a deal. Let's say if you go up against the Grail Chapel, right? And around this, it's making guys stubborn or something like that. Well, okay, for sometimes it'll be a big deal where it'll be making things stubborn. You can go and, of course, if you're like a single model or something where normally you'd be breaking, throw them up there and you get stubborn, and that can be pretty awesome. But some of the stuff is a little bit straightforward. Some of the rest of it is not so much. Let's say, for example, the buildings that give you hatred or frenzy. Now, something like these here, and you can even maybe apply this to other buildings too that give you a bubble effect, is you almost want to look at them keeping that bubble in mind. Because one of these things I see happen a lot of times, like, hey, look over here, there's a building that gives hatred. I'll move up here so I can get lots of attacks. But then, of course, that's where the fight is, and so my opponent comes in, and he gets a lot of attacks as well, and it's really just a double-sided bloodbath. And even if it's something where, hey, my savages were going to crush you anyway, well, now instead of crushing you and moving on, well, you just killed more of my guys before this happened. So, first of all, before anything, really look at how the math changes. Because it's not only a thing of like, okay, well, before this going to there, this would happen. All of a sudden, if you're adding in hatred or frenzy or something like that, the numbers really do change. And it's also a thing, too, of do I even need this benefit? Do I need to go in there, have extra kills, and then all of a sudden, is this going to be worthwhile? And with this as well is, as I said, keep that bubble in mind. Because if you can handle it, like it's one thing if the building's in the middle of the board. It's really, you just have to walk up and use it. However, if all these things are a little bit more pulled back from the center board, you can try rushing up and making it so that the building's almost kind of behind you, so it's giving you the benefit and not your opponent. And of course, you have to measure that out. Thank goodness for pre-measuring and making sure that once you're in combat, all right, I'm in range, you won't be, and it's just a straight benefit for me, and that's just awesome. And that really comes down to the way that you're going to be placing down these things. Really think about how you're going to be placing these different pieces of terrain and say, again, is this even going to help me as in general for the army? What's the odds going to help me? Maybe it's the thing where, okay, it can really help this one unit, but in all the other cases, it's probably going to hurt me. So I probably want to have this off in the middle of nowhere if I can place these things. And this is where really, like I said, this topic gets very diverse, very deep, and I really do want to hit this thing because even though I could probably talk about this for an hour, it's very important that people think about this and use it. One of the saddest things that I see sometimes is that people say, yeah, magical terrain, it's just too complicated. It just adds too much randomness. Or screw it. We're going to have a couple of simple forests in a building. We're good to go. And there's a couple of bad things with that. The first reason why you shouldn't do that is it's not the way the people design the game. You got to realize that just like I tell people to play Watchtower, to play all the main scenarios, this is a way how they kind of like built Warhammer to work. And, as a gamer, something you should do is actually giving it a try. Two, you should be practicing these things because you might see them in a tournament. You and your buddies in your basement might say, you know what? Magical terrain's for chumps. We're not going to use it. All of a sudden, you go into a tournament and you got labeled terrain and all this stuff. It's like, oh my God, this changes everything. So you really have to make sure you're used to this stuff, even to know just the rules, right? It could be you're looking around like, oh, Altar Arcane, yeah, I'm sure it's a building or something. Yeah, okay, and over here. Like, you need to know what these things do. So again, I really highly suggest that you guys use these things in your games, and maybe even too, if you're trying to practice for a tournament, rotate in the different pieces of the terrain just to make sure you have experience with all of them. Okay, now let's go back to another one which kind of works with the bubble effect. Let's talk about the weirding well. Now the weirding well can be a little bit random. Sometimes it heals you up, sometimes it makes you stupid. It can be kind of either way, but the big thing there is if it heals you up, that can really help you sometimes. So of course the first thing you have to look at is it actually going to help you? Because the main thing to think about is it's only helping you if you're not engaged. Once you're in combat, it's not helping anymore. So really, you're going to be wanting to use this against armies that have a ranged threat. Something that's going to be shooting you as you come in and you want to heal and then fight. And again, you want to watch that bubble and you want to be the guy that gets there first. Because you want to move up, use the well, heal up, and then they engage you and it's too late for somebody to use it again. So that's one way, again, where you want to be planning where these things are for how your movement's going to go. The second thing you have to really look at here for this magical terrain like the weirding well is maybe using it as a stepping stone. Saying, all right, I'm going to send my knights or whatever it is into this unit over here. I'm going to kick their butt and I'm going to break them. However, after I'm done that, I'm going to be taking some losses and I'll be combat ineffective. Well, we could say then is I'm going to charge in, kick your butt, spend a turn or two drinking from the well and getting your wounds back, and then join in the fight again. So again, it's one of these things you have to really plan out the game. Now, one of the hardest things with this is that even though you can have 50% control for when you're deploying terrain and placing it around, and how you can have control over the way you deploy your army and say, okay, well, this wants to be over here to take advantage of this weirding well, and this wants to really get hatred to help me with this matchup. The problem is you also have to think, too, that because of these bubbles and kind of the race effect that happens is that really look at who's going to get first or second turn, because that can really change where you're going to be in those bubbles. You know, take a look at it and say who's getting the +1, and then say, okay, well, the majority of the time the person with the +1 is going to get the first turn, and then weigh those risks. Am I saying that, okay, I did this matchup so I can get the weirding well before we engage this, but if they get first turn and they heal up first, am I going to lose this combat now? So you really have to weigh these risks. One of the things you can do that's kind of sneaky with some of these things is my favorite one is with the Frenzy Tower. This one can be great because people just don't think about it. People are like, yeah, Frenzy, that's awesome. I'll go in there and get an extra attack. That's awesome. And they don't realize all the bad sides of Frenzy. You have people that might move in there with Fast Cav. And it's like, also it's like, oh, geez, I have to take a frenzy test or I might have to charge. So all of a sudden it's like, okay, well, you used to have an eagle, but now it just charged me and I killed it for free. Hooray. The other thing is that once you have frenzy, you're immune to psychology. So they can't flee a charge anymore. That's another big thing that people don't really think about. Another one, of course, is with the frenzy forced overrun. So you get somebody there who's over there and say like, all right, I got my bubble right. My frenzy building is back there. The bubble is right. You're going to have to come and fight me. And then what you do is you fly in an eagle right there in front of it or whatever throwaway unit you have. And they'll be like, okay, well, first of all, they're making frenzy tests to not charge. And they're probably thinking, all right, I'll just go and charge and kill it. All of a sudden, when they kill it, not only is it a thing where they're overrunning and showing off their flanks, well, now they might be too far back to get that frenzy bonus anymore. So it really worked against them. So that's something you can really look at, really have a lot of fun of. Some of the other stuff really doesn't play in a lot of times, like I said. One of the ones I want to kind of bring up is the whole idea of the obstacles. Obstacles sometimes can be really important when you have these key matchups that are going to be really close. You might want to defend it just so you can get those little bonuses. But for the most part, I don't see people usually defending them because they're often like random spots. They're not usually in critical locations, especially because when you're placing them down, you haven't done the deployment back and forth yet, so you don't know what's going to be a critical location. And if you're not there perfectly set up with it, it's usually not doing too much. So those ones play kind of a smaller effect on the whole game. Now, another one that can play a very big role is the woods. Now, when people just use the common woods, they don't always see this. It's like, okay, all I have to remember is if the majority of my unit is in there, then I lose my steadfast. So clearly, I just want to either just be sticking a little like winging or whatever, like a 10% of the unit, 20, 30, whatever it is. But as long as the majority is not in there, it just might as well be open terrain. It doesn't really matter whatsoever. Well, once you make these things magical, it changes everything. And the real thing here is that it really is a risk as to what does this thing do, because some of them are good, some of them do nothing, and some of them are pretty damn bad. So what you really want to think of here too is just like how normally you'll have throwaway units that you'll be throwing out there to be going and baiting all this stuff. You want to start with a small unit inside a forest to know what it is before you dedicate something else. And that goes with movement and deployment. So if you have a massive wood in the middle of your deployment, you're like, man, something's going to have to go in there. Well, before you decide what's going to go in there, go and put like your fast cav so that one guy has his little hoof in there, and then you can roll and figure out what it is to know how bad it is and how big of a risk it's going to be. Because if all of a sudden, if it's a venom thicket and you have your whole ranked up unit there, they're going to be like freaking half dead by the time you get out of there. So you got to really watch out for these things. In movement, it's almost the same thing. If you want to go through somewhere, you might want to be setting your fast cav or your throwaway units to clip in there first and go do their duty. Let's say you're going to have some fast cav that's supposed to be rushing around the lines to get to those war machines. Well, maybe if you're planning this out, say like, well, probably if I'm going to be trying to go for this charge here, I'll have to go through these woods. So that fast cav, instead of just going like this and going around, it's going to go in a little bit, touch that wood, and then go around. And in that way, sure, you lose a couple of inches or something, but now you're knowing what this is before you're supposed to go through it. Something else here, while we're talking about woods, I always find hilarious, is that I still see the people that think of woods almost like it was back in the last edition. In the last edition, when you're going through woods, you're going half speed. So really, if you're on opposite sides and stuff, it's not only a thing where it's blocking line of sight, but it's just like, I could not charge through there because at half speed, I'm not going to make it. And all the time, I see people showing off flanks when they're going to be going into because they think that the woods are going to guard them, and meanwhile it's like, well, no, okay, I'm just in your flank and I crush you. So really watch that. It's not really a magical thing, just something I think is funny and interesting. Now, another one that can be kind of like this is rivers, where until you go into them, you don't know what they do, but at the same time, a regular river is so negative in the power it has over the units moving through it. It almost, these effects don't really change too much. Whenever I'm playing a river, I don't usually care too much, geez, what type of river is this going to be? Because it's already affected my overall play so much. I mean, it's not like I'm going to be sending in some fast cav first to see what type of river it is, and then my orcs are going to slowly plod through it. It's going to be something more where, all right, you know what? That's a freaking river. If I ever try going through it, it's going to take me forever. I'm probably going to take some losses. And if I ever get charged, I have no ranks. I have no steadfast. This is stupid. So really, as far as the magical rivers go, those don't really play that big of a role. And I say that's the one that plays almost the least. Me wondering what type of a magical river it is usually even takes less of a precedence or priority to me as compared to, what type of magical wall is that. Even though the wall you kind of know before. At least those times, they come up sometimes where it's like, haha, you'll be half initiative, or I'll cause fear, so I don't have to be taking a fear test. I find those actually come up a lot more than the whole thing of what type of magical river it is. Now, while we're talking about magical and all these things, magic can be very different depending on what terrain you get. First one you might get is the whole, magic circle, where it's giving magical resistance to everything. Now, sometimes this is completely useless. Other times when guys are hitting you with a foot of gork or whatever it is, being around this magic resistance is pretty damn helpful. So again, it's one of these things where when you're doing the whole placement and looking at the matchups, you have to really think, like, who's going to be casting the shooting magic? Because if I go and put this in the middle of a deployment zone, 50% of the time, I'm giving that to my opponent. So, maybe I'll put it inside the deployment zone if I'm a defensive army and you're offensive, because either I'll be holding it or you'll be leaving it. And I don't really care. Again, I mean, if you're trying to use it, you got to try and think, like, what are they going to be shooting at, right? Usually your little magic missiles are killing off fast cav or weak infantry or something like that. All right, they're going to be there, right? They're going to be around this. So that one's, again, kind of straightforward, but it's something that can change things. And then it gets bigger from there. Now, Wizard Tower, this thing can be pretty insane. The Wizard Tower, where whenever you're the closest wizard, you're a lore master. Wow, this can change a game on its head, because all of a sudden, that level 1 you took just to hold a scroll caddy? Yeah, all of a sudden he knows everything from the lore, and you can use him as a 6 dice kind of engine to say, like, all right, dwellers, dwellers, dwellers. Oh, your head blew up? I don't really care. You're my level 1. So these things can be so massive. And again, I mean, at the end of the day, they're also a building, so you can always use building shenanigans, which I'm not going to get into here because we're going to be talking about the magical stuff. So again, when it comes to this here, you're going to have to be planning where these wizards are going to be. Now, one of the things you can do with this is think about the ranges and the uses of your magic casters. If somebody has long range magic and it's not the general, well, it doesn't matter where this wizard tower is going to be. It's still going to help them. If somebody is the general and has to be staying with their army, kind of like I run my great orc shaman, well, all of a sudden, unless it's somewhere where I'm following my army, it could be just, I would love to be a lore master, I just can't be near it. Or the other thing, too, is that let's say I have the lore of death, and here's this wizard tower in the back of the thing. It's like, all right, I'm a lore master, and I don't have range. So that could be a big thing, too. So when planning around those, it's really a thing, again, where I can't stress enough, you really have to, probably the biggest effect where you're going to be thinking about these things is when you're taking turns placing these terrain. It's different when you're in a tournament and everything's there for you, but you really have to look at who's going to be helping you more. Is this going to be helping them or you? Where you have to be putting on it? Like I said, if it's something where it's just going to be hurting you and you have all the long range magic and they have like the general that will need to be near it, all right, that thing's going to be right at the side. Meanwhile, if it's a tournament and it's already starting to be there, you could be trying to think like, okay, I could be trying to fight this here. Or at the same time, you can look at some of these things and say, all right, they really need to be by this piece of terrain. They would love it. So I'm going to go and try then know that if they're going to be kind of camping around here, well, that means that their flank is going to be over here. I will go for that. Or they might be a thing where, okay, this line's going to stay here around this, so I'm going to kill this other stuff that's on the other side of the board, and then I'll just get the win that way, right? Like I said, this is such a complex topic that there's so much stuff to cover. And then, of course, there's the thing like the Waystone where you just get extra channels. Being around that thing is just better. There's a whole thing in there is like, oh, if you roll a bunch of ones, you get a miscast. I mean, it never really happens, right? You just usually get extra power dice. So these things I find have a very big effect. Now, the one piece that I absolutely hate is the whole sorceress portal. Now, this one, of course, every magic phase is shooting off another spell, and not only do I dislike it because it really slows down the game, but I dislike it because it's completely random and it just totally hits you no matter where you are. It's not like it's the bubble effect. It's like, okay, if you're within 5 inches of it, it'll do this to you. It's like, no, this could be a thing. You put way in the corner, and it still says closest unit, blast, blast, blast. So it's always going to be having an effect. So really, what are you going to be doing with this? Because you really never know what the hell it's going to do. Is it going to soul blight you? Is it going to wild form you? I don't know. The biggest thing you have to do is not keep your weak units around it, because you never know it's going to spit off that fireball. A fireball going into your trolls, yeah, it ignores your regen, might do a couple of wounds, not so bad. A fireball going into your fast cav, well, all of a sudden you wiped out half the unit, it panics and it goes off the board. That can have a massive effect. Everything else, it's just too damn random. It could be a thing where if you were walking into a game saying, you know what, looking at our lists and at our skill level, I'm going to probably beat this person. It could be then that what you're going to do is have some throwaway unit just walk by that portal and say, all right, you guys just take whatever it is so that my main combat units can do their thing. And this is not going to screw up my game. It's not like I'm going to charge in there for the win with my Savage Orcs. It Soul Blights me or Wild Forms him, and I just lost the game. At the same time, like I was saying, you can almost use a little bit of psychology here and place one of your more important units that you know he's going to be coming after you by this actual sorceress portal, and then they're saying like, man, I don't know if I want to charge in because I don't know what's going to happen, right? So if you have something like a bunker or like more of a combat bunker, right, where they know like, geez, I'd love to kill that level 4, but he's right there and I don't know what's going to happen. Again, that's a really risky way to play, but it's something we can play with our mind, and maybe now they're not going to go after you, and you can just sit there blasting them with spells or something. Either way, yeah, it's not my favorite one, but it's something you have to kind of think around. And those are probably the ones that are going to be affecting your game the most. Another one that you can probably talk about that affects your game that you don't normally see if you're not using the regular table rules is the settlements. Because what the settlements give you is the settlements give you multiple buildings and also, like all the walls and then something else. You can have your altar and cannon there with 3 buildings. And what you start seeing with these things is very compact areas. Of course, it's supposed to be like a settlement, right? So all these buildings here all together. If you guys saw, Anthony played one recently where he had like 2 or 3 settlements. And of course, there's like buildings everywhere. Well, of course, if you see this is very much going to be changing the way you play just because, hey, if I have a bunch of hordes and there's all these buildings all over the place, I just can't move through there. So you're going to have to change your deployment to have all your little stuff go through there. And it could be a thing where like, all right, in this settlement, there is this awesome thing like the Ultra Cane or whatever I want to be taking advantage of. But it's going to be restricting my movement too much to even use it. And again, maybe that's something you can be using against your opponent. If you know that, hey, he's going to love this. You put it deep inside the settlement, put the buildings around, so all of a sudden he's trying to like awkwardly trying to place himself inside the settlement, and then you have all the angles now are, all right, you're between these 2 buildings, your back is to the altar, so I'm going to go around the building this other way. Now you can't see me, and I'm able to charge this other unit, and you're completely out of the game type thing, right? So, man, this is just so many things where I've talked in the past of how you have to be really placing terrain, and this is the thing too where not only are some people against using magical terrain, there's also people that are against gaming the terrain system. And because there's some of those out there that see placing terrain as a part of the game. Just like I'm making an army list, just like I'm playing it, placing down the terrain is a part of that game in a tactical battle of wits already where you're trying to do these things. And they think that, hey, if I'm going to take that river and say, all right, this is my river, like off in this corner here, so it's out of the game, that's gaming, you're a jerk. The other side of the coin is the people that want to just go and say, like, you know what, this is all the terrain we have, let's make it look like a cool little town. So it really depends on what it's going to be. And of course, if you're ever going to a tournament, it doesn't matter because it's going to be set there anyway. And then, of course, once this is all down, you're going to be rolling for sides. So you're going to have a 50% chance to be by the terrain you even want. Man, I mean, one of the ones that can also really help is the Anvil of All, right? This is the hill that gives you magical and flaming attacks. All of a sudden, it's like, oh, you're going to be coming after me with these crypt horrors or something, right? Well, I'm just going to go around this hill. I now have flaming attacks to take away your regen, or if you're against trolls or something like that, or my archers will go there and I'll shoot these flaming bows at your guys, right, to take away, let's say, to an HPA to take away his whole ability to come back, right? So some of the things can be so major. And I guess the final thought I want to say here is that you always want to weigh the benefit of all these pieces of magical terrain, because a lot of times they are just straight up benefits. Oh great, you have hatred. Oh great, you have this. But a lot of times it's obviously forcing you to change your game plan. It's not always the fact that, hey, you know what? What do you know? I was going to walk up here anyway, and I was going to be doing my charges, and there's an idol of Gork. Well, isn't that fantastic? I just get this extra charge. Normally, people are changing the way they're deploying to take advantage of that. And one of the things you have to really think about this is, how much of an advantage is it really giving you? Like I said, you can't really veer off to give that unit hatred, but were they just going to win the fight anyway? And now what you did is had a better chance where they could just redirect that unit and keep it out of the fight. So really look at it and say, not only have to play the game of what's the best matchups and what should be what type of terrain, what should I be scared about if they get to that terrain. Also say like, well, okay, this could be automatically better for me, but if I just run my normal game plan, I could be better off anyway. So there you have it. It is really a deep and complex topic. I tried rushing through it, and this was still 25 minutes. I mean, if I would have gone through each one and describe how we do this thing, it would have been over an hour for sure. So I hope that's a good summary of it for you. And either way, like I say, play it, have a lot of fun, and we'll see you next time.